Throughout the course of the 1920s, citizens of the United States were presented with a large struggle. The struggle between traditionalism and modernity manifested itself in various ways during the 1920s, including the changing role of women in society and the rise of consumerism in the cities. However, a big way in which this struggle was manifested was through the cultural discourse between rural areas and populous urban areas. Therefore, a split was created between the two cultures, with the urban areas fostering opportunity and change for women and minorities through newfound freedoms in form of self-expression, such as shopping, clubs, music, and the entertainment industry, while the rural areas stuck to traditional ideas and gender roles. In the pre-1920s, women had a very different role compared to today. This was the role of a mother and housekeeper. This was the idea that was shared by people in rural areas, and they wanted this idea to stay. But in opposition to this, in populous cities, the role of women was changing due to World War I. In World War I, while the men were at war, there was a demand for workers because of the supplies needed for the war. So women were given jobs. This opened the opportunity for women to make their own wages, leading to women having more freedom, along with women getting job opportunities. Women were given the right to vote in the 19th Amendment. These two big moments in women's history then turned into a certain woman dressing and acting a certain way. These women were referred to as flappers. These women would go to clubs. They spent their time and money more by their own accord. Also, these women changed how they dressed from longer hair to shorter hair, called bobs and more. This change in women was a big controversy between traditionalism and rural and modernity in urban areas. Parts of rural areas wanted women to have a separate role, but in these new big cities, women were given opportunities for money, vote, and to act how they want. This fight was one of the control versus freedom. During the 1920s, economics were booming due to the rise of consumerism. One of the main things that caused this was the introduction of credit. Credit allowed consumers to buy things without having to pay their cash at the moment, but add a tab to then be able to pay later in time, but gain the goods or service immediately. Advertisements rose in popularity as an attempt to take advantage of this. Coke ads and Ford ads represent the idea of growing advertisement and spending money on items that bring joy and are not just needed to survive. Another big thing about the rise of consumerism was the growing interest in stock markets. Stock markets were impactful to the rise of consumerism because it was a new way to invest their money and grow their net worth. In the past, consumerism was not a thing because people would just buy what they needed and save their money only for necessities. They often even traded goods for other goods rather than spending money. Slave trade was a good example of traditionalism because it shows how people used some type of currency to gain goods or services instead of the traditional way of money. Their entertainment was reliant on each other and they didn't think about things like clothes. Some artwork represents modernity because it shows how people were dressing in high fashion, and there were companies like Vogue that were promoting and advertising this high life. With everything that happened in the United States as a result of World War I, urbanization became a prominent concept in 1920s America. As a part of the Great Migration, many African Americans moved north for job opportunities in support of World War I, and women took over many of these factory jobs as well. These new employment opportunities ultimately led to a large concentration of people in cities, over 50% of the population by the year 1920, who had excess spending money in their pockets, fueling the newfound concept of consumerism. Consumerism displayed the contrast between the urban and rural cultures profoundly, as consumerism was essentially the spending of excess funds for almost entirely recreational purposes, contrasting the extremely minimal spending of farmers and other rural residents, living off of only what they need and finding entertainment in the simple forms that their ancestors had passed on for generations. Traditionalists before consumerism did not have many luxury items like radios and were more careful about spending their money, and they only spent it on things that were necessary to live. This hunger for entertainment led to further urban developments, including the upbringing of club life, theaters displaying things like performances and cartoons, as well as the public figures with extreme popularity followed by the media, the first celebrities of the time, like Babe Ruth. All of these developments are what contributed to creating this cultural divide between the traditionalist rural citizens and the modernist urban citizens, as the traditionalists were not sure what to think about urbanization and its acceptance of change and diversity. This led them to reject these new ideas, afraid of anything that differed from what they were accustomed to. As we end the video, we want to connect our topic to the present and a focus on social media. While in the 1920s, radios were the main form of communication, this grew into social media. Though similar ideas still remain, there is a large group of people who use and connect themselves worldwide to the ideas of social media, just like how people connected to the ideas of flappers, consumerism, and cultural expression. These people use social media to spread their ideas, connect, and more. But like people in rural areas, they believe that these new ideas and connections are bad. In the 1920s, people in rural areas believed that people should stick to traditional ways, but in the present, it is people who think that social media should be reduced and kids and teens should live like people before social media. This could mean being outside more or having to call people on the phone. Now the people today dislike social media because of two of many issues: cyberbullying and misinformation. Cyberbullying problems can create a sense of unbelonging and lead to very serious issues. Also, misinformation can lead people, especially younger people, to create false understandings of the world. But it's not all bad because companies, schools, and parents are working to limit one or both of these problems. So even if new ideas, past or present, can be scary and harmful, if used properly, they can bring light into the world. To conclude, the ideas of new and old will crash for a long time. In the 1920s, progression for women, increase of consumerism, and increase of diversity was met with much reliance. People in these rural areas wanted things to stay the same, but bringing new ideas and progression to society is how good change can happen.